In 5 years, we will legally own our own thoughts. That is the premise of today's conversation. Welcome to Exponentially. New devices can now read or even manipulate our mental states to help us relax, learn, or reduce pain. As they do this, they harvest data, and that is where we should be concerned. Can businesses be trusted with this very private information? And do we have any protections at all? In the past 5 years, over $1 billion has been invested in developing these kinds of technologies. Some of this research has had magical results. This is a paralyzed man. He can do this with the help of a brain implant. But with every new technology, there are, of course, downsides. In this case, basically letting companies into our brains. So how can we make use of this tech without firms taking advantage of us? Do we need a new fundamental human right, a right to our mental privacy? When it comes to human rights and evolving neurotechnology, there is no one more expert than Professor Nita Farahany. I wanted to share a story with you. A few years ago, I was sent a headset from a startup that was meant to improve your cognitive performance. And you put it on your head and it would zap you with some direct current. And I was too scared to use it. So I put it back in.
That's probably a good thing, actually.
Right, well, I put it back in its box and I now use it as a shelf.
It's probably a good thing that you didn't use that one back in the day, because we don't really have a very good understanding of the zapping your brain, the hacking your brain with precise electrical stimulation. So, as you think, as you do anything, neurons are firing in your brain. They give off tiny electrical discharges.
And so we can measure those electrical signals. I guess the
That's
famous approach is the EEG. And if anyone is old enough to remember Ghostbusters,
Right.
the Rick Moranis character wears he's wired up to one.
That's right.
Early on.
Now, if you're using consumer-grade electroencephalography or EEG, you're going to have far fewer electrodes. And so it's really the average across the entire brain. And then those averages, through software and advances in artificial intelligence, can then say, okay, this is happy, this is sad, this is paying attention, this is fatigue, this is mind wandering.
I'd love to see one.
Sure. This right here, these are just earbuds.
They just look like ordinary headphones.
That's right.
Like the ones I have for the gym.
They're just like the sensors that are embedded into multifunctional devices like a smartwatch. This puts them into earbuds so that you can take your conference call, listen to your music, and also have your brain activity measured at the same time.
And what is that able to measure from those small earbuds?
What they have currently trained this on: attention, focus, fatigue, boredom, engagement, positive and negative emotions.
So those are all emotional states that you could imagine matter to students who are studying or
Yes.
people who are working in desk-based jobs, or actually in non-desk-based jobs out in
Right.
the field.
Already, this particular company has partnered with a number of corporations where, if it's offered as part of a brain wellness program, for example, people are really distracted in today's world. You're on your computer, you then quickly go buy something for your kid's birthday party, you get a notification on social media, and that context switching is costly.
So these are all consumer-grade devices that are, in a way, leaking into the workplace.
These right now primarily are entertainment or very low stakes decision making. And a lot of the other more sophisticated neurotechnology, and by sophisticated, I just mean it's able to more precisely pinpoint in the brain where something is happening. Those really run the gamut from electrical stimulation or implanted neurotechnology, where there's been tremendous advances in the past few years.
Right.
Companies that are investing in the ability for somebody who's a paraplegic to be able to navigate their environment, or a person who has lost the ability to communicate, to be able to speak their mind by using implanted neurotechnology to type.
And when you talk about some of these implants, it seems like some of the technologies that you've been discussing are as much about reading the brain state as they are about imposing a new brain state on us.
Right. So, for example, there was a woman who was suffering from severe depression. And she described herself as being at the end of her life, like no longer in a life worth living. And neuroscientists and physicians were able to use electrical stimulation in the brain to reset that brain activity, like a pacemaker for the brain, that enabled her to recover her will to live, to overcome depression and have a typical range of emotions instead.
Wow.
That's pretty extraordinary.
That's extraordinary because right now the disciplines of neuroscience and psychology are rather different
Yes.
and they're separate.
Yes.
And what you've given an example of is using neuroscience to try to tackle something that would have traditionally just been seen as a psychological problem.
That's right.
So let me summarize where we are. We've got this fantastic science and engineering, which is progressing, and it's giving us a new class of neurotechnologies, which we can use for diagnostics, for therapeutics, for augmentation as well. But these are also dual use technologies. They could be applied in ways that are harmful, perhaps. I remember reading about a school in China, for example, which for a short period of time was putting on a brain monitor on the kids and allowing the teachers to figure out which ones had drifted off. Now, I think it's a right of a young child to zone out of school.
Right.
I mean, we all did.
I think anytime you're looking at, for example, coerced use of it, whether that's in the workplace or in a school setting, that it's deeply problematic. And that's because not only do you have a right to have your mind wander, but you have a right to think freely. Right? The ability to be able to have a dissident thought or have a creative thought or, even fantasize about the coworker in your office who you have a bit of a crush on. Like there's,
I work on my own, so
well, there you go. No
yeah,
crushes, no crushes
no.
for you. But these flashes of bad thoughts you have for a moment, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you have a bad thought that pops into your
Right.
head, right? In other contexts, it's already being used in these kind of coercive ways, like in police interrogations where people's brains are being interrogated to see if they recognize crime
Is that
scene
happening
details.
already?
Yes, it's already happening. So there's a company in the US that has been selling their technology to law enforcement agencies worldwide. And whether it's that technology, which has been used in places like the UAE or in Singapore, is being tested out in Australia.
Yeah.
And there have been criminal convictions that have occurred as a result, so-called criminal confessions in response to brain-based interrogations. Those are, I think, very chilling applications of this technology.
There is a second slippery slope, which is that there are technologies that do purport to understand what our brain states are, but aren't neurotechnologies. I think of this area of emotion recognition, which is being attached to certain types of CCTV cameras, and people are claiming they can look at your face and they can say you're hungry, you're happy, you're sad. Those seem to be on a similar sort of continuum to exploit or take advantage of our inner mental state.
I think if you look across the world, whether it is through microfacial changes that people are trying to interpret using video cameras and AI facial recognition, to cognitive and personality testing that's being conducted for workplace, like during the pandemic, one of the popular video conferencing technologies introduced the ability to pick up attention and focus. How many screens did you have open and how much of your, face was
I didn't
trained
like
on
that.
those things.
I
I didn't like that either, right? But all of these are really trying to target our brains and mental experiences. And there are
Right.
different degrees of precision and different degrees of intrusiveness. All of that falls into this category that I find concerning, which is to actually get at the hidden information in your brain.
These technologies are improving
Yes,
exponentially.
They are.
And there are these combinations as well. I've been tracking a variety of experiments where scientists have connected the readings from fMRI machines to different types of AI. And they've been able to reconstruct the image that you've been thinking about. You've been thinking about a church, and they can produce a sort of blurry church. And over the last 4 or 5 years, that church has got sharper and sharper and more precise. And even more recently, scientists have been able to look at fMRI readings and predict the words that somebody was thinking about. I mean, how does that process actually work? What is the science behind that?
A person in an fMRI machine is shown a bunch of videos, and then a region of the brain called the visual cortex is studied down to kind of individual levels, the voxels, we call them. And then a machine learning algorithm, a pattern classifier, is trained on this is the image the person is seeing, this is what their brain activity looks like. This is the image, this is the brain activity. And you do that
So
enough
different
times.
voxels light up if I'm looking at a cat compared to if I'm looking at a cheeseburger.
Well, the pattern will look
pattern,
different, right?
yeah.
So the voxels will represent things like the graininess of the image or the color of the image.
And now, of course, an fMRI machine is this huge machine,
Yes.
not that practical, but the point being that once we are able to correlate activity as we see it through an fMRI machine to particular sequences of words or pictures, we can then find easier to read signals. And then without needing to pop you into an fMRI machine, we could start to extract those thoughts or those pictures.
There was a recent study that was done that was really a leap, an advance in this area, where they could use the predictive nature of generative AI, which predicts the next word, to decode language from the brain. And we're able, with a very high degree of accuracy, to reconstruct continuous language from the brain. They were then curious as to whether those same findings could apply to a different portable system called FNIRS, functional near infrared spectroscopy, which picks up blood flow changes in the brain just like fMRI does. Could it apply in that context as well?
So blood flow being the key thing that appears to connect to what we're thinking or what we might be speaking.
So for that particular study, they wanted to see if blood oxygenation levels, the patterns of blood flow through your brain, could be used to reconstruct language. They were able to do so powerfully with fMRI. They then trained it on FNIRS to see if it worked in that context. And it did. And I could show you what an FNIRS looks like.
I would love to see what an FNIRS looks like.
Now, this is not what they use literally in this research study,
Right.
but this is just another band. And it has in it, you can see these little lights right there.
Yeah, little lights. It's sort of infrared light of the kind that might come out of your TV remote control.
And those little lights are lights that go through the scalp, through the skull, and look at the hemodynamics of the brain. The
Hemo meaning blood, right?
Exactly.
So the blood flow.
Exactly. The blood
movement.
flow in the brain.
And of course, hundreds of millions of us have these smartwatches that actually have quite cheap sensors in them and yet can be really accurate for measuring things like blood oxygenation or pulse and all sorts of other biomarkers. So we've got some expertise in taking lower cost, low fidelity signals and turning them into more reliable signals. How long before there are going to be affordable, portable FNIRS devices that you might see employers buying for their workforce?
I mean, I think one like this is already fair game for a workforce, right? And
Fair game in the sense it's affordable for a company to buy.
both affordable for them to buy and makes sense in some ways to distribute to employees.
Right.
And that's for a couple of applications for brain wellness programs to decrease stress levels in employees. Or this one I use for focus. You can retrain your brain to have longer periods of focus and increase the activity in your prefrontal cortex, which is a form of cognitive enhancement. That
I
could
just
be
have to say the idea, Nita, of you with your multiple degrees and 2 professorships having even more focus is, you know,
it's an unfair advantage. It is.
Yet
it
another
is.
unfair advantage. Can I try it on? Is it
Yeah,
comfortable?
It is. This one might be tight for you. If you loosen it up, it may be more comfortable. But try it
yeah,
on.
let's give it a go.
You need to loosen it because you do want a good fit, and you want it just above your eyebrows, just like that. Yeah.
Wow.
And just untwist the back of it so
untwist
that
the
it's nice and
back.
snug.
Now,
Yeah.
does it suit me? And the
I
colour's
think
good?
it looks great.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's a
Yeah?
good. I like the orange band.
So I could use this to improve my focus if it was connected to.
Yeah. So if we
app.
just took, for example, let's turn on the button on the side. So just turn that on.
Right.
Yep.
let's
Now
go.
it's on, and we will launch the app.
And there's no electrical current that's going to zap me.
How do you feel now?
Yeah,
Hopefully you feel all right. And so then what we could do is we could go into training.
I'm not going to get as high a score as yours.
No, so we're going to do another session. Oh, good news. You have brain activity.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm officially sending blood around my brain, which
Yeah.
is really good for me to know.
Okay, now what the goal of this is, you see the 0% here. That doesn't
It
mean
says,
that's
it says 0%
no, but that's
neural
not your
activity.
brain
That's what-
activity. Now what
yeah.
you want to do is Okay, good. Look at you. Look at you go.
Ah,
Wow,
look at
that's better
that.
than I've ever done.
Yeah.
All right, so
You're
what you
so
want to
charming.
do is you want to increase the rate of firing in your prefrontal cortex. You're trying to get
All
this
right.
ball to go up.
So should I try thinking about something hard,
Yeah,
difficult?
think
Okay, so I'm
about
going to go all
and
the
try to stay focused on that something difficult. So that
capitals
see how
in
you're
Africa.
like
So
plummeting. Don't plummet.
Lusaka,
Stay
Harare,
focused.
Cairo, Algiers, Casablanca. Oh my goodness,
Yeah, you don't want the
Ouagadougou.
crashing, so you don't want the oh my goodness where your mind wanders. You
Oh, I
want to
see what
try
you
to
mean. Okay,
stay.
let's do the periodic table because I know that one. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, argon, neon. I know it too well, so it just doesn't find it interesting.
Well, that's the thing is you don't want to be just doing memory recitation. You want to actually
totally sold on this. I'm totally. I hope I can get this in the UK. The thing that strikes me about these technologies in particular is that the brain is that last fortress, and our inner self is the thing that defines us. And yet we're at this turning point where that inner space could become part of some business's private enclave or some government's Orwellian fantasy.
So I worry about this deeply. And I worry that that final private space, the space that I think is so critical both for self-awareness and for resilience, for the ability to know truth from fiction, the emotional self-reflection and cultivation, is at risk of brain transparency.
You mean the idea that we can just be seen through entirely?
Essentially, right? I mean, I think the way we define intimacy in a lot of relationships is by choosing what emotions, what thoughts, what secrets we want to share with another person. And if all of that can be revealed by decoding your brain activity, if other people can have access to it, whether it's your partner who says, no, I want you to prove that you're in love with me, or, your employer who says, I need you to have 5 hours of focus today, or
show me you gave me 100%.
that's right. Prove it to me.
Yeah.
Or, a lie detection test by the government, or the way you authenticate yourself at borders is through brain transparency. I think this final space of mental reprieve is at risk.
Your suggestion is cognitive rights. So what do you mean by that?
So I believe that a right to cognitive liberty as an international human right, a right to self-determination over our brains and mental experiences, would give us both a right to access and change our brains if we choose to do so, but also a right from interference with our mental privacy and our freedom of thought. And that's something we can recognize as existing within the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Aren't they already in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? The right to privacy, the right to freedom of thought and belief, and the right to self-expression without undue influence?
You can look to the right to privacy and say what we need to make explicit as a right to mental privacy is included within it.
Right.
You can look to the right to freedom of thought, which has currently been really interpreted much more narrowly to be about freedom of religion and belief, and say, no, this is also about interception, manipulation, and punishment of our thoughts. If we look at all of the existing rights, we can say an individual right to self-determination is fundamental to every right that is part of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So it's not that I think we need new rights. It's that we need a new umbrella concept, which is cognitive liberty, to help us and direct us to update our interpretation of existing rights.
So how do you propose drawing a line between the acceptable and unacceptable uses of these neurotechnologies?
So I have framed cognitive liberty as a right to and a right from. And I think the right to is critical because the truth is we don't treat our brain health and wellness nearly as seriously as we treat the rest of our physical well-being. We don't have access to information about our own biases and preferences. Self-insight, I think, is powerful, which is why it's a positive right to access information about your brain, a positive right to be able to use it. Notice me saying you, right? It's about you being able to access and use the technology, you having control over your own brain data, it not being commodified and misused against you, and a right from other people coercing you to use the technology or taking your brain data to analyze it, to mine it, to share it, and to sell it. It's giving you and putting you in the driver's seat of your own brain.
Even if we are in the driver's seat, we do have precedents from other types of therapeutics. I'm thinking about attention deficit disorder therapeutics. I'm thinking about antidepressants, which emerged over the last 30 or 40 years, and particularly in Western markets, particularly in the United States, are heavily overprescribed because it's easier to deal with some of these issues through a prescription than perhaps figuring out how to tackle those issues. These advanced neurotechniques will be more sophisticated, more precise, more effective. So why wouldn't they fall foul of the same type of behavior that sees them just being used pervasively, even if we are notionally in the driver's seat?
They could be, right? I mean, I think that's the risk. And there are risks to individuals using them to shortcut their own cognitive processes, their own process of self-discovery and self-awareness and growth and emotional development. It can be misused by others. It can be misused by parents, well-intentioned though they may be, to try to redirect the brain activity and brain development of their children. I think in order for us to effectively realize the potential of this technology in society, we have to not just have rights, right? Not just have norms, but we need to also be substantially increasing people's awareness of how their brains can be accessed and changed.
Given the urgency, the technologies are getting better and better at exponential rates. I'm a bit perplexed about choosing the UN as the route to do this. I mean, it's not an organization that in recent years people would say is adept at dealing with change or indeed effective when it does finally get round to doing it. So is that the right way to approach this?
First, it's not the only way, but as a starting place to say, we need worldwide to recognize as an international human right that we have a right to cognitive liberty and that simply directs us to update existing human rights and our interpretation of it, sets both a strong legal norm, which doesn't require everybody to come together. And even if we don't succeed, meaning even if the UN takes zero action in this space, that doesn't prevent us in the United States, in Europe, and other countries from interpreting existing human rights consistently with the idea that there's a right to mental privacy, that freedom of thought is broader, that we have an individual right to self-determination.
I mean, it strikes me that even if this isn't sufficient, also self-regulation could be very, very valuable. If you're able to persuade the handful, soon to be dozens of companies making these technologies that cognitive rights matter.
I think that's absolutely right, which is corporations should act as if there is cognitive liberty and should be cultivating it and recognize the mental privacy of employees and to say, here's technology you can use to improve your focus. We won't collect the data. We won't use it to make choices about you. Those aspects of cultivating cognitive liberty within ourselves will enable us, as the technology continues to rapidly develop, to still be able to have a strong sense of self.
Now, the premise of our conversation is that within 5 years, our thoughts could be legally protected. How likely do you think this vision could become reality?
Within 5 years, I think the technology is going to be mature and it's going to be widely available at scale across society, which is why I believe before that happens, we will make moves to recognize a right to cognitive liberty to enable us to be empowered by rather than oppressed by the technology.
Reflecting on my conversation with Nita, I can't help feeling that the technologies we've discussed will be mainstream even faster than we think. More than 200 million of us wear smartwatches, and these collect personal information every second of the day. It's becoming a normal experience. And the exponential improvement in technologies will allow devices like these to monitor us more closely. Yes, to the point of tracking our mental states. So it does make sense to protect our minds, our thoughts. But is going via the slow-moving UN the best route? Or can we together find a better way? I'm Azeem Azhar, and you've been watching Exponentially.